Right. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live. This is the second in this series, all around how to plan when it's impossible to plan. I'm really delighted to be joined this morning by Sam Hawkins. How you doing, Sam?
I'm good. Is this a podcast? I know we're on. I know the cameras are on, but I was thinking this is probably the most time I spent on LinkedIn ever, and I'm just thinking whether I should, when I talk about this after the event, whether I'm going to just call it a podcast for ease.
Well, our podcast generally audio only. This is kind of triple threat coming at you from all angles.
And liveness as well. I'm just wondering about whether this is TV broadcast. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, basically, this is as big as it's going to get, I think. And just imagine that you are now on global news platform, breaking news, every country, everyone around the world, 7 billion people. Yeah, this is it. This is the when the Pope dies or whatever. That's what happens. So no pressure. Sam, apologies, and to you and to anybody else who can hear, my neighbour has chosen this very moment to start trimming and mowing lawns and making lots of noise in the garden. So apologies if that bleeds through. Hopefully it's okay. So Sam, you have a few hats on. I mean, not literally today. Actually, you're normally wearing a hat. Today you're not wearing a hat. But you have
the lockdown Barnet has gone. So the hat of shame that I used to wear on Zoom every day to keep hair out has had a few months off.
It's beautiful. So you are, we've known each other for a few years and worked together for a few years in different forms. I would describe you as a kind of renaissance man of the creative industries, of skills and apprenticeships, of fundraising and organizational sort of strategy. I think you touch many kind of small and growing organizations with your skills, and I'm very delighted that you work at Always Possible on our business support programs so deftly. But you've had a life many years as a fundraising consultant, working in the music industry and festivals, but also many other forms of public and private life. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So getting under the skin of fundraising, funding, grants. And this is for not just for the charity sector, but also private sector and social enterprise, all organizations that particularly in these crazy times are looking for some additional support, whether it's sort of patching over emergency losses through the pandemic, and we know that the government have stepped in to try and support businesses. So what does that look like? But also to support with growth and productivity and innovation and the next steps. Rebuilding the national economy. There's lots of little injections of cash that businesses can get their hands on. So we're going to explore where that's coming from and why, and what makes a business stand out in their application. So that sounds good. So we're here for half an hour. Good. So, do you want to add anything about your background and your sort of professional journey so far?
No, I just was thinking about it actually. So I haven't done a proper kind of assessment of how long I've been doing this and what I've been doing. And I did do my first funding application in 2008 for a festival that I'd just created with a couple of colleagues. So on and off, I've been doing it since then. And just my background is I did start out in the music industry, which was a little bit of funding around, but it was very much commercial operations. I sort of learned it from there. So always in the back of my mind, so fundraising has been alongside activity that you're like, well, this is going to make money or earn revenue as well. And so we've taken that forward, even though I have done stuff that's more kind of trust and foundations and charities and things like that. But so 2008, so 13 years now to funding. So hopefully I can share some of that. And but I just want to talk about what's interesting, what interests me, and some of the top tips I've been given by other people, because I thought that's quite a nice way just to share that kind of stuff.
Definitely, thank you, and I'm grateful that you're here. I think now you say that, I think I wrote my first funding application in 1999 to a charitable youth trust to try and get, I don't know, £1,000 or something towards a play I was putting on with some friends.
Actually, really, just something like it was. We worked together in education for a bit, and it was to Think Big Fund that ran for a few years, and it's particularly geared at 16 21-year-olds, 16, 24-year-olds, and I was helping some students write some bids when they were 17. And it was really, really great. It's like, get started early. Yeah,
well,
£300 to put on a fashion show to raise money for mental health, and it's like, brilliant, do it.
I absolutely recommend anybody listening in who works with young people or works in education. One of the best ways to improve skills in persuasion, in making a case, in budgeting, in strategy and planning is to write a funding application, even if it's just a dummy run and it's not going to be sent off, as an exercise in terms of bringing a group of people together to get their heads around what they need now and what they'll need over the next months and years, and how they would deliver it. I think it's an incredibly good exercise to do. So let's delve into that then, Sam. Let's maybe start with the kind of short term. I mentioned that because of the pandemic, I would say the kind of grants funding landscape has sort of got on steroids a little bit. There've been quite a number of new schemes that have come out from central government, well, actually from the EU, central government, local government, lots of trade sectors, things like hospitality and retail and the Arts Council, so on. These organisations have stepped up to try and reallocate funds so that organisations that have not been able to trade that well, don't go bust. Where are we at the moment? With signs that the pandemic as we know it is mostly, hopefully, the worst of it behind us. What's the sort of situation?
Well, I promised myself I would come on here. I wouldn't make any sweeping projections about stuff. So I'm not going to try and predict anything. But as you've covered, there has been a lot of cash injected, like mad amounts of money put into businesses to try and keep themselves going. The assessment at the moment, I'm currently working on COVID recovery funding for the creative sector. So I'm working with a few clients in music in particular who are applying for the final, what's being called the final round. So that kind of tells you quite a lot. As part of that, there's an assessment of what a lot of the people who need to be supported, the hospitality, festivals, music venues, the principal places that have been hit hardest by having to shut. They're putting in for recovery funding to see them through to what is hoped is the final point before everything can return to normal trading conditions. As part of that, they're being asked to run through all of the funding that they have accessed, all of the schemes. So that's furlough, additional restrictions, grants from local authorities, VAT deferments, all sorts of what you would not necessarily call grants, but you would certainly call funding, just support coming out. And the view is that, the majority of those strands are now closed with the view that they wouldn't be open again because they are emergency funding. What is coming forward in its place is growth funding. So funding to support new enterprises, or to support businesses trying to get back on their feet. We've got down here in East Sussex, we've got a targeted program looking at the visitor economy. We've got tons of tourist and hospitality businesses who need a bit of support. So small grants for people to invest in themselves and get going again. We've got continues to be European Regional Development Funding. So yes, there is still EU money available, even though we've left the EU. Previous commitments are being seen through, and that's around economic development. So ways there is always funding around there for innovation, for what society values in terms of businesses, so jobs, skills, innovation, efficiencies, and things like that. So there is that. So I would say, from what I've seen, the landscape is adjusting to the end of emergency funding and then a resumption of targeted support, growth, innovation, things like that.
What are the kind of characteristics of the grant? I mean, there'll be people tuning into this that are probably well seasoned and have had successful applications in the past and are just wanting to get up to date with a sense of what's happening at the moment. And there'll be people tuning in who've never ever applied for a grant. They've run a commercial business for a while. It's either grown through investment or sales alone. But perhaps people are recommending now, saying, well, actually, there are these EU or ERDF grants available. There are innovation grants available. There's grants to support growth and productivity. And so it's not, like I said earlier, it's not just the non-profit sector. It's all over the place. But why should an organisation consider applying for a grant? And maybe more acutely useful, why shouldn't they? What is it that's what do people really need to consider when they're thinking about putting in an application? Because I think it's fair to say it's not just a case of you jot a few thoughts down, say, well, we're a great business, and you get 20 grand in your bank account the next day.
I like the way I sort of write over the years. It's really helped me to think about grant funding is to sort of take a step back and what is it at its essence, which will hopefully kind of help answer that question. So there is funding out there for anything that society values. So that's health, cohesion of society, care for the less fortunate, culture, heritage, education, skills, and then economic development, prosperity, the environment, everything that we value. So if you're doing anything that's suggesting that, there is likely to be some funding out there to help you do that, because what society values, society wants to pay for. What that means is that there's anywhere that kind of there are collections of people organised together, so governments being a big obvious sign, but also trusts and foundations, charities, or even private enterprises that want to support a particular end will have money out there that you can do. So it's when seeking, when thinking, what should I go for? It's about, well, what am I doing? What's my business doing? And how can I? Is there an element of that's trying to achieve something that I can align with what these people are trying to achieve? As mentioned kind of earlier as well, like it's good to think in the broadest possible terms about what funding means. It is not just grant. So if you've got a bit more experience in this, sort of thinking, well, I want to seek a grant which will get me some cash in my bank account to allow me to either keep doing what I'm doing or maybe do something new. It comes in various forms. You've got grants that are cash in the bank, of course you do. You've got cash up front. You've got grants where you get cash back after you've paid for something. You can get vouchers to encourage you to do something, particularly in sort of renewable energies and things like that. You might get it in the form of tax credit, or you might get it as in terms of in-kind support. So thinking very much in the round about your finances and how it's going to appear in your accounts and everything is a good way of thinking about it, because it might open up loads of other ways that your business can benefit. That might not be a check in the post or something like that. In terms of what you should and shouldn't go for, so to take my abstraction a little bit further, so whatever society values, society wants to pay for, there are going to be sort of protections around what that money does and how it's paid for. It's not, it doesn't want to be money set aside for renewable energy, doesn't want to go into someone's bank account to be spent on a new gas powered car or something like that. So that's why the grant schemes, and when you're seeking out funding, you're talking to somebody who's an expert, or you're looking on grant websites, then you're going to be drawn to what the criteria are, and that's where the funding sector kind of leans on existing setups, and that's where the private sector is distinguished from charities and things like that, and what they're trying to achieve.
A lot of it's about trying to de-risk in a small way as well. I think it's recognising, particularly a lot of these new grants available for small and growing enterprises, of all different sort of legal structures. It's recognising that they're not going to be able to invest in that innovation, or they're not going to be able to maybe take on that apprentice or extra staff member, things like that, without having some financial support to weather the risk a little bit, at least in the first instance. So what I recognize a lot of the EU funding is around you have to be a viable business to go for it. You have to be a business that's got a plan. You've got to be a business that's often able to match fund the grant that you're getting. So you have to go through quite a few hoops to be able to show that you are viable. And then what the grant does is to help just make what you've got go that little bit further, so that you can push the boundaries of what you'd be able to do just on sales alone. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you cut out just at the beginning there, but I got the gist of it. In terms of, it's interesting. Yeah, you got to prove that you're a viable business to then attract funding. Funding is in a way slightly risk averse, but it's the same as lending in many respects. It's not, there's some funding out there that maybe wants to support some higher risk stuff, but you've probably got to establish a better track record on that. But yeah, having there is quite a lot of startup though there's quite a lot of funding available when you're a startup. So if you're a registered company and you're within the first 12 months of your existence, that opens you up to quite a lot of funding. It's only available to startups that recognises a bit more of the risk, and so the funding amounts might be a little bit smaller for you. But you kind of get a bit more of a leeway to sort of invest in that first bit of kit that you need, with a bit of trust that that's quite essential to get businesses going. In terms, what was the second gist of the question? Sorry, I did lose a bit of your question.
I can't. Who knows? It was ages ago, and it was probably not that coherent from my end. We've got a couple of really good questions from people tuning in. So hello to Dory, Joe, and hello to Lubna. Thank you for your questions. First one from Dory Joe is about EU funding. The question is, how long will the EU fund be available? Actually, there's a number of funds under this big umbrella of European structural investment funds. So you've got the ESF fund, which is very much about regeneration and bringing, closing inequality gaps. And so it's often about skills, and it's about training, and it's about helping long-term unemployed people. And then you've got the ERDF funds, which tend to be more about infrastructure and growth. So that might, sometimes that's used to build bridges. Often it's used to boost businesses. Now, my understanding is that existing pots of committed money will be available until the end of next year, December 2022. But there might be a few that go on a little bit beyond that. But they'll all be channeled through, different providers that are gatekeepers to this funding, and often it's very, very specific what you can apply for. So Dora Jo says she's planning to put an application for a placemaking project. How should she identify the right funding pot for that? I've got some thoughts on that, but Sam, what do you think?
It is going to depend on where you're based. So as Rich says, if you're looking at EU regional development funding, that's going to be channeled through the area in which you're based, or where your project's going to take place. There's a understanding that the local scene understands what the local need is, and so can make decisions on where that money goes. So the first port of call is going to be looking at what is available locally. If you haven't already, a good first port of call is your local growth hub. So you'll have one for your region or your county, and each one will have a different priorities and a different scheme. So they will be able to make you aware of everything that is available at this point. So that would be my first point of call. Rich has covered on how long it'll be available. I just think on that note as well is that the EU funding is a label that is interested in regional development. As and when that does end, 2022 or slightly beyond, it will be replaced with other funds attempting to do the same thing. If you look at the Northern Powerhouse at the moment, that is co-funded between the EU and also central government trying to do the same ends. Trying to achieve the same ends. So it gives you a suggestion of how things might change. It's all very much up in the air. It's never been quite as up in the air as it is right now, because nobody's ready to commit or knows exactly what's going to happen. But things will become clearer, and there should be a bit of a transition through and a bit of a continuity before things change enormously.
Yeah, the government's replacement's called the Prosperity Fund. We know that, and we know that there are some key areas of priority. Obviously, it's going to align with things like the Levelling Up agenda. It's going to align with particular infrastructure investment that's been set out by government. But as Sam said, look, the best places to keep an eye on in terms of the kind of gatekeepers of this fund is your local enterprise partnership. So if you Google local enterprise partnership, you'll be able to see which area you fit within. LEPs usually cover a couple of counties or a region of the UK, but also local government, and it's the LEPs that run the growth hubs, as Sam said. So Google growth hub near me, you'll find often a page which has all sorts of listings of opportunities for funding, and local providers will be there to help you through that. You know, Sam and I work on a program supporting East Sussex businesses to access capital funding, particularly, isn't it? So sort of investing in equipment and resources to help with their growth journey.
So we'd be good people to talk to if you're doing something in East Sussex, but we'd much prefer, you know, to go speak to somebody in Liverpool City region if your work is up there, because
we're good people to talk to regardless.
Yes.
You know, you can always ping an email to ideas@alwayspossible.co.uk if you've got a particular region or area that you're trying to get funding for. We can certainly point you in the right direction, or maybe make an introduction. In terms of placemaking project, potentially that wouldn't be EU funding. That sounds more like some form of cultural or there's a lot of grants and funds at the moment that are being steered towards sort of reopening the high streets, getting people back to use spaces confidently. So I've seen a lot of contracts out for tender, looking for sort of creative organisations to help program events, you know, in and around areas where perhaps footfall has dramatically fallen, and so within that there might be some commissioning. You know, there may be several tiers of it. It might be the local government that commissions some creative producers to put on a number of events over Christmas, and as part of that there'll be some local commissioning. So it's worth having a look at that. So yeah, Dory Joe, do follow up with us if you want to give us some more information. We can help.
Yeah, it is intriguing, Dory Joe. I think, you know, there's it all depends on the nuts and bolts of what you've got planned, but you know, it sounds like that might be something you could put into the community fund, which is the new name for the national two big lottery funds. There are, it's intriguing. There might be other options for you there, and also some trust and foundations are also prioritising placemaking and regeneration of high streets and things like that. So yeah, there's
absolutely.
It depends on scale, depends on lots of things, but you know, it might be something that you would construct a bit of a plan that you could apply to a few different people.
So you know, so to be clear, what we've been talking about there is a lot of sort of structural funds that come through, you know, government bodies. So that's public money that's been earmarked for particular things. When Sam talks about trusts and foundations, these are generally independent pots of money that have been left as an endowment when someone wealthy has died, or perhaps it's a corporate entity that's set up a foundation with a percentage of their profits, and so that money sits in a bank, and then the interest from that money is then spent each year on a number of identified projects. So that's, you know, the biggest foundations in the UK, certainly for things around sort of culture education, would be things like the Gatsby Foundation and the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, Paul Hamlin Foundation. Some people might be familiar with those. Perhaps we can come back to those in a minute, Sam, with some ideas of how.
That's right. And sort of local mutual banks have charity foundations as well. It's quite a wide team.
Yeah. So we will come back to that in a second. Just addressing Lubna's question: are there any search tools where we can identify which funding pots would align with our business idea? There are a few, but they're not always that easy to use. But Sam, what would you recommend as a first point?
No, they're not. They take a lot of resources to keep them all up to date. And as we touched on already, it depends. You know, they're very localized as well, so it's quite resource heavy. There's the Institute of Fundraising can have contact. It's a paid membership organisation. They've got a couple of free resources, which can be quite a good place to start, particularly if you're starting out. Some nice sort of introductory things. But if you're looking for something more advanced, you want to pump in exactly what you're trying to achieve and get an idea of the funds, then it might be something more more kind of paywalled and also grant finder as well. It is available through some local libraries as well, and can be accessed that way. And that's probably the best tool that is on the market if you're looking to put something together more thorough. That's grant finder.
Yeah, so if your local library has what's called a BIPC, a business and IP centre, then you can book a one-to-one and go and look at Grant Finder for free, put in some lots of detail, and you'll be able to walk away with a list of live grants, and I really would recommend doing that. Alternatively, if you don't yet have a BIPC near you, then you can subscribe to that service, but there is a cost. I'm not entirely sure what it is, or spend some time with a funding consultant, usually for a reasonable, affordable a couple of hours. Somebody can really help point you in the right direction. But I think asking,
even if not one-to-one, you can look around to see if people are doing group workshops and that kind of stuff as well, which can be either free and subsidized or much more affordable.
And if it's about business, then so I go back to your growth hub, because it is part of their responsibility to keep sort of investment and innovation grants information up to date. If it's for charity, social enterprise or so on, then your local voluntary and community sector network, so there will be one wherever you are, that's sort of the member organisation for local third sector. Also, I reckon they will have a pretty good up-to-date resource about grants that are targeted at your area. So Sam, just a quick bit about then, perhaps you've come across a grant or a foundation that's got some money available. What's the kind of first thing that you would do as a kind of port of call in terms of thinking about whether that grant's right for you? What would you read first?
Well, I was going to read everything you can. So I think if we're talking like characteristics of a good fundraiser or business that's good at it, it's like attention to detail. Particularly if you're new to it, because they're all built on criteria. So they're trying to achieve certain things. So they'll try and do that by setting up what you can and can't do, who you can be to access the money. And you just make sure that is correct. So make sure you meet the essential criteria. Are you incorporated in the right way? Have you been in trading long enough? And is your postcode of your registered business address in the right spot? And then, get a sense of it. Ask yourself, do you kind of understand it? Is it kind of making sense to you? And feel like because what you want to avoid is putting some time and energy into something that is maybe going in the wrong direction, or you've got to revise, or has a very little chance of succeeding. So just sound like a year 9 teacher, but just saying, do all your reading before you start the essay. And then, it's just that's it. If it's something new and maybe you're taking a punt on something else, can you talk to somebody who's involved in the program? Chances are there'll be people paid to promote the program and tell you who else has been successful. They're always, it's one of those, the door is always open and they mean it kind of situation. So do that.
Certainly, kind of Arts Council, National Lottery, Heritage Fund, some of the specialist national grant providers will always have relationship officers that are there to answer questions, and they are very good. Take advantage of that. As ever, these half-hour chats fly by. We have but 1 minute left, and it would be remiss of me not to say, always possible. We have access to grants. We give advice around funding strategy. We work with a lot of organisations and have helped people raise many millions over the last few years. So do get in touch with us, alwayspossible.co.uk, if you've got some specific questions. And next fortnight, next to these LinkedIn Lives, which will be on the 7th of September, I think, we are looking at products and projects, and I've got my special guest Lucy Payne. So it's very much linked. You might want to go for some funding, but is your project idea, your product idea, your service, the thing that you want to grow and innovate around, is that watertight? Is that robust enough? Have you planned it well enough? Have you got the right collaborators? That's what we're going to be looking at. So Sam, thank you so much. It's a bit of a whistle stop, but and we barely scratched the surface. But thank you. That was some really, really good little tips and insights. And yeah, obviously people can touch base with you via alwayspossible.co.uk if they want to chat with you a bit further. But thanks again.
Have a go, everybody. It's not scary as it seems.